The Bible is the best-selling book of all time. It is arguably the most read, most ubiquitous book in America. But who decides which texts get to be in the Bible? In this talk, I want to introduce you to one of the books that didn't make the cut. The Trimorphic Protennoia is part of a collection of manuscripts known as the Nag Hammadi. The Nag Hammadi were discovered in 1945 by an Egyptian villager named Muhammad Ali al-Saman. Scholars knew that some of these texts existed because they were described in polemical writings by Catholic Christians. We knew that in the 1st through 3rd centuries there were esoteric sects with alternative cosmologies who were competing with what has now become traditional Christianity. Scholarly understanding of those groups had been largely dominated by polemical writings. With the discovery of the Nag Hammadi manuscripts, scholars were able to get a more complete view of the Gnostic beliefs. The Trimorphic Protennoia is considered to be a Sethian text which was completed around the middle of the 2nd century. The Sethians were so named by the early church fathers because they considered themselves to be spiritual descendants of Seth, the 3rd son of Adam and Eve. Most of this cosmology described in the Trimorphic Protennoia will be unfamiliar to most Christians. Much of the text is written in the first person, with the divine first thought, the Protennoia, describing her own properties. In some ways, she is very similar to the traditional Christian God. She is ineffable, invisible, and omnipresent. Though she is 3 in 1, like the traditional Christian God, the Protennoia is the Father, Mother, and Son. She is the womb that gives shape to all. She is androgynous and creates by copulating with herself. In this conception of creation, the world was not created by the Protennoia. Rather, she created other deities, some of whom turned against her, becoming the dreaded powers and archons. The great demon, Yaldabaoth, created the world. Yaldabaoth stole the Epinoia, a divine light, from his mother. When Yaldabaoth, in his arrogance, created the world, he accidentally put the Epinoia into human beings. Thus, human beings ultimately belong to the Protennoia, though they are trapped in the material world. The Protennoia descends 3 times, first as the voice, then as the speech, and then as the word, to help the human soul return to her. In her first descent, she reproaches the powers, saying, "Cease, desist, you who tread on matter, for behold, I am coming down to the world of mortals for the sake of my portion." The Protennoia warns she will reclaim the divine spark in the human soul, which Yaldabaoth stole from Sophia. In the 2nd descent, Protennoia brings revelation to the sons of light. Finally, the Protennoia appears as a man and proclaimed the 5 seals, which enable people to strip off the garments of ignorance and put on a shining light. Unlike traditional Christology, Jesus is not understood to be fully God and fully man. Rather, Jesus is the man who is inhabited by the Protennoia in her 3rd descent. While the Trimorphic Protennoia may seem somewhat unfamiliar to Christians, it bears many similarities to the prologue in John. For example, compare these 2 passages. "I am the Word who dwells in the ineffable voice. I dwell in undefiled light, and it, the speech, exists from the beginning, in the foundations of the all. I alone am the Word. It, the Word, is a hidden light." In John it says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. In him was life, and the life was the light of men." In a second example, the Trimorphic Protennoia reads, "I revealed myself to them in their tents as Word, and I revealed myself in the likeness of their shape, and I wore everyone's garment." In John it reads, "And the Word became flesh and pitched a tent among us, full of grace and truth." The similarities between the Trimorphic Protennoia and the prologue of John sparked controversy in the scholarly community. Rudolf Bultmann argued that the prologue of John was actually added to the book of John as an attempt to correct and rebuke the cosmology of the Trimorphic Protennoia. He was arguing that the prologue of John came after the Trimorphic Protennoia. Of course, this could be viewed another way. DeConick argues that the Book of John is actually a Gnostic text which was appropriated by Catholic Christians. In this view, the similarities between the Trimorphic Protennoia and the Prologue of John do not reflect an attempt of polemics, according to John, but rather they reflect the similarities between the Christologies of John and Sethianism. This is completely contrary to the traditional narrative of the Gnostic movements. Traditionally, it's thought that Catholic Christians created the Gospels and interpreted them as they were originally intended. The Gnostics come in and twist those books to mean something that they were not intended to. This view actually reverses the traditional narrative, saying that instead the Gnostics wrote the Book of John, which was then reinterpreted by the Catholic Christians to fit their theology. Of course, other scholars argue that the Prologue of John came before the Trimorphic Protennoia and is yet another example of Gnostics trying to twist the Gospel to fit into their cosmology. So why should we care about these scholarly disputes? I would argue that ideas have histories, and whether you're aware of them or not, you're participating within an intellectual tradition. The Bible didn't fall down from the sky. Rather, it was put together by a group of people. When you choose to read the Bible over something like the Nag Hammadi, you're choosing to privilege that group's interpretation over another's. It's good to be cognizant of this, and being aware of these histories can help us get a deeper understanding of our beliefs, or alternatively, challenge the beliefs that we once held. Thank you.